die Hand. So please take your seats so we can continue and finish in time. Well, we will be late anyway. Okay. So I ask the next panelists, Judith is already here, Mrs. Banquier and Jean-Marc, please have a seat here, just starting from here, the left side. Okay, same procedure as first panel, different topic. Actually, the idea was today to discuss the first panel more the political framework and political conditions for civil society, and in the second panel to focus on the economic conditions. And that's how we said funding civil society activities with public money, too much to die, too little to live. And I'm glad to introduce to you on the right side, starting with Judith Püringer from Arbeit Plus. She will say something about her network herself. I have already introduced Jean-Marc Roran to you. And I'm especially glad to have here Mrs. Banquier from DG Justice in Brussels. And I think she will also explain herself what her responsibilities are at the Commission. Well, since I've had some complaints during the break that Austria was not much an issue during the discussion of the first panel, and maybe making us believe that while everywhere else situation is difficult, but Austria is still the Insel der Seligen, I don't know how you say in English, well, just different, everything's better. No, we don't think so, and I would like to ask Judith, even if we step a little bit out of the topic, meaning economic conditions, to say a little bit on how you perceive the civic space in Austria recently.
Okay, first, thank you very much for the invitation. I found the first panel a very interesting one. It was quite political and also philosophical, and there were so many hints for books. I will never be able to read them, but I have a huge list, and I'm grateful for that. Especially Martha Nussbaum's latest book is really interesting for me. There's one point I want to make, and maybe it's a thought that comes to me after I heard this first panelist speaking, and it's a more general thought before I come to the situation in Austria. And I think, and that's what I think when I speak of my organization in Austria, if I think about the civil sector in Austria, that I think that we really have to bear in mind that if we speak about civil society and non-profit organizations, I believe that civil society, civil engagement is about all of us, because sometimes in Austria the whole discussion has a tendency of speaking about a sector, of speaking about certain organizations that maybe feel a missing link between the state and the economy. But I think it's very important to bear in mind that it's about us, that it's about everybody, and so it's about democracy. And so in a way, civil society, civil engagement, in a society is, for me personally, the nucleus, or even something like a reproductive cell for democracy. And because we spoke so much about the narrative and the question of where the narrative could start, in my personal view, the narrative should start at this narrative that it's a story about all of us, and that we are all involved, and that we are not talking about a sector or organizations. But that's just one thought that came to my mind while listening to the interesting discussion before. So today I'm invited as Arbeit Plus, and I was asked to briefly introduce this network. We are a network of 200 non-profit organizations that are working in the field of labor market policy. So it's 200 work integration social enterprises, So we are thinking about ways of how to integrate long-term unemployed people into the labor market. So that's our main issue and that's our main topic. And I'm also invited here today, at least I think, that's why, because Arbeit Plus is a member of the Bündnis für Gemeinnützigkeit, or the Pact for Non-Profit Sector Alliance, as Franz already introduced it before. And I think that we formed this pact, or that we formed this alliance like 2 years before, is a first symptom or a first tendency of this need for closer collaboration. So that was not something that came out of the blue, but it was something that came out of the need for working together on serious issues and serious questions about participation. And the head I haven't introduced until now is that I'm also, like at Arbeit Plus, we are also a member of the so-called Solidarity Pact. And I don't know if you heard about it, it's called Solidaritätspakt, and it's been in place for a year. And it has a reason why we have a Solidarity Pact, and the reason is because more and more NGOs, more and more organizations from the non-profit sector, more and more civil society organizations have to come together in order to show solidarity. And why? Because they are being put under pressure more and more. And what was really interesting for me before, when listening to the Hungarian colleague talking about Hungary, was that I remembered being in many European conferences, being at many European forums, listening to civil society organizations from other European countries talking about an oppressive system, talking about the problem of not being able to voice their own opinion, not being asked to participate, being confronted with campaigns against NGOs. And I always was interested, I always was in solidarity, but I always thought, okay, this is not happening in Austria. We are in a completely different situation. And today, when I listen to you, when I listen to the Hungarian colleague, I thought, okay, this is exactly what's happening in Austria at the moment. So for the first time, I really had the feeling that things are changing. I mean, I have it all the time, but now I have this also learning from the European perspective that what we are facing now in Austria are first symptoms of this, what Civicus very well described as narrowed focus, or narrowed approach, or narrowed space, narrowed civic space for civil society organizations in Austria. So we do see that things change. We feel it because the topic of this panel is financial resources, and of course we feel it first because so many financial resources are being cut, not only in the field of labor market policy, where it's quite obvious, and where's a public debate also about cuts in labor market policy measures, but especially in civil society organizations. And many of them are very small, many of them don't have a real lobby to voice out their opinions, so that's why we come together in this Solidarity Pact and try to show how many, especially small companies or small organizations come under pressure at the moment because of a lack of resources. And it's not a lack of funding on a very general level, it's a lack of funding in a very concrete work. So that's some of the symptoms we face. Yes, our first tip is to collaborate. So we do form alliances. We go to the non-profit sector alliance. We do have the Solidarity Pact. And that's the good news. But the bad news is, yes, things are changing for the civil society sector in Austria at the moment.
During the first panel, Walter Heller from FRA said that there is also a pattern even when it comes to the cuts of funding. Do you see such a pattern in Austria as well?
Yes, we do see this pattern, and we see the pattern that at the first cuts in funding are happen for very small organizations, so very small NGOs, small organizations that work with very vulnerable groups, or groups that are being targeted by the government, like long-term unemployed people, women, asylum seekers, and so on and so forth. So they are targeted at the first place if they work with very vulnerable people. And yes, we do see this pattern, so I could agree on that.
Okay, obviously we cannot produce a complete picture of funding situation of civil society organizations either in Austria or even less so in other countries. But since we are here also because there is a program, there used to be a program called Europe for Citizens, funded by the Commission, and now it has already been, I think it has been said that we are in a transition phase, or this program is in a transition phase, also I think linked to the discussion of the multi-annual financial framework. So I would like to invite Jean-Marc to brief us a little bit on where we are today and what are the main issues that you are dealing with, or you have been dealing with in your role also as a member of the EESC. Please.
Okay, in this panel, we are going to talk money, funding civil society and public money. In France, we say, we have an expression to say, money is le nerf de la guerre. I don't think exactly what we can translate in English. Everybody in this meeting room know that civil society organizations play a crucial role in promoting active citizenship in Europe. A vibrant, diverse and independent civil society participates to the foundation of a democratic society. We say it at a moment when EU values are being threatened in a number of countries, and we see initiatives that lead to shrinking civic space. In this context, the support of the European Union institutions to civil society is crucial. The current discussions on the next multi-annual financial framework is a sort of thermometer to measure how human rights and democracy are supported. I have been able, you say, in the Economic and Social Committee, I was a rapporteur of two opinions about financing of civil society organization by the EU, and the second one was the Fund for Justice, Rights and Values. And I said that it's not very frequent. We address some compliments, some congratulations to the Commission. It's a scoop because in general we are not in the harmony. But we know that there is efforts from the Commission to challenge and to give the means for the NGOs and the voluntary sector to give the means to work. And of course, there is two criticisms. The first is there is not enough money, and also we have no instrument to help and to support organization, NGO, organization de la société civile in certain countries, Poland, Romania, and so on. That's the big difficulty. So it's important that we can all together find solutions. And it's a different landscape today because with the Commission, with all the institutions, European institutions, we know that we are in a dangerous situation, and we need to decrete general mobilization, and we are afraid by the results of the next election. So to begin, I can say that we have some means, we have some possibility to work together, but it's important to find solution when in certain country it's impossible to have finance for the activity. And in this room I know certain colleagues who suffer because they are in danger. I don't speak about certain organizations. We are totally thrown out of the discussion with certain governments, as in Poland, for example, where the government create another platform or competitive sort of competition with those who exist today. That is the first comments I can do on this subject.
Okay, Jean-Marc, Dr. Banquier, you said during the break that you were prepared to give us a more broad overview about how and through which programs and probably with which, based on which policies the Commission funds civil society activities. Please.
Thank you. I also want to start by thanking you for the invitation. This being here, it's always nice to be in Vienna to start with, but being here also gives me an opportunity to listen to you and to exchange with civil society. We in Brussels sometimes have the impression that we are a bit distant, and so for me this is, since we are drafting and designing the new funding mechanisms for the period after 2020, it's very valuable for me to be at an event like this one, to be able to listen to your needs, to listen to what you report on what's going on the ground and in our member states. So thank you very much for the invitation. It also gives me an opportunity to present what the European Union is already doing in terms of funding, financial support for civil society. We have a tradition, I think, in funding civil society, and we do this because we like civil society, but also for some very egoist, or I don't know, for some selfish reasons. We believe that civil society is indeed central and very, very important for the European Union. Gives us a possibility to link with citizens. Again, we are sometimes a bit distant in Brussels or in, where the other institutions are based. So for us, civil society is really a linking element between us and the citizens. We also want to support civil society because civil society helps and plays a very important role in promoting, defending European values. And thirdly, we think that civil society plays a very important role in challenging us, asking us for being accountable, and therefore strengthening actually the trust in public institutions. So these are the a little bit selfish reasons, if you want, why we want to support civil society in our member states. And again, we will not only do this in the future, we already do it now. There are certain programs, funding programs of the European Union that some of you might know and some of you might even get funds from, that fund civil society organizations. You mentioned the Europe for Citizens program. That is a program that funds civil society organizations that work on European citizenship, also organizations that work on European identity, on remembrance work, for example. So this is Europe for Citizens. We also have the Rights, Equality, Citizenship program. I don't know whether you're familiar with that. The Rights, Equality, Citizenship program funds organizations that are active on fundamental rights in Europe, on democracy in Europe, on women's rights, on non-discrimination, on violence against women, on fundamental rights I already mentioned, data protection, citizenship. So quite a broad range of topics, and we fund organizations active on these topics. There's also the Justice Program, for example, that funds rule of law activities by civil societies. It was mentioned in the previous panel, access to justice activities by civil society. So quite here as well, I think, very pertinent fields for civil society organization. Now, based on our experience, we are now designing the future generation of funding programs. It was already mentioned earlier. We are now working on the so-called Rights and Values Fund. So this is a proposal of the European Commission in the framework of the so-called multi-annual financial framework. So the European budget works in 7 years cycles. We are presently at the end of one of these 7 years cycle, and in 2021 the next cycle will begin, and we are now already designing the programs for this next cycle. And I would like to quote our President Juncker. There were lots of quotes today already, but he said such an exercise for designing a new multi-annual budget has nothing to do with accountancy, but it's more really, it's a definition of where we set our goals and how we define our objectives and our ambitions. So this multi-annual financial framework and the programs we are designing there are really an expression of our ambition. So in this framework we are working on a Rights and Values Fund, and this Rights and Values Fund should make it easier to fund civil society organizations in the future. Will hopefully open the door for funding for civil society organizations to a bigger extent than is the case today. However, I have to say, I mean, we are speaking about the future. The Commission has presented a proposal, and this proposal is now being negotiated in Council, where you have the member states who have to pay for this program, and you also have the European Parliament, so we have to agree together on all these proposals.
How much money are we talking about?
I can give you figures. I mean, the Rights and Values Fund in total is a bit less than $1 billion for 7 years. But I also want to say this is not a fund that will be exclusively for civil society. I also want to be realistic and not put your expectations, I mean, not blow up your expectations, but this is a fund that will also fund activities that foster these policies, etc. It's not exclusively designed for civil societies, but it's open for civil societies. Let me just finish maybe with two points that I find important to say here. And these two conditions, or these two parameters, they apply to the present funding. They will also apply for funding in the future. First of all, the European Union cannot by itself, and the European Union budget cannot by itself fund all civil society in Europe, of course. There needs to be a partnership with member states. There needs to be complementarity between national funds and EU funds, and the EU budget it alone cannot shoulder this challenge. And we therefore ask for applicants that when you ask for European money, that your project or your organization provides European added value. So there must be a European dimension in your activities in order to access European funds. And secondly, I also want to say we cannot give out money without competition. So our funds and our funding programs, the most important principle there is that there is competition for money. We don't have unlimited funds. We publish calls, and we wait for applicants in these calls to submit proposals, and then it's a competitive process by which we hand out our funds. So these two things are very important. I know I'm not making myself very popular here, but these are very important parameters for EU funding, this competitive element and also the EU value added, and these will also apply in the future.
Well, if I understand correctly, what you have in mind to do is still quite uncertain, because I think just yesterday negotiations somehow between the Commission and the Parliament failed also on the multi-annual framework, no? Isn't that true? It's true that it's uncertain, no? How sure can we be that what you proposed as a Commission will really become part of the multi-annual framework? What is the probability?
I think there is a very strong determination shared by several institutions on the importance of funding for civil society, and I think there's quite a strong will to get this through. Of course, there will be a lot of discussions still, and long discussions on details, on amounts, etc. But on the very principle, I'm very positive, and I'm rather optimistic, yeah.
Okay, Jean-Marc, you share that optimism from where you are?
It's a question. We talk with Madame Blanquier just before this panel, and we say it depends on the decision of the member states, because the Commission proposes, and very often we are blocked in the decision of the member state. But I think that the Commission can faire un petit effort, some effort. You ask how much, France. The program Rights and Values is 642 million. And all the financing of l'ensemble des programmes, the Economic and Social Committee proposed 1.5 billion. The Parliament proposed 1.9 billion, and we don't know exactly what the figure of the Commission. With the response of Madame Blanquier, perhaps I will be optimistic. Silence.
But the figures are on the table, huh? They are not secret.
Okay, before
I can brief you after.
Okay.
Before we now run into the risk of having a discussion here that only few of us, including me, or excluding me, understand really, I would like to open the floor already at that point, because I think it's maybe this, and you were actually using the word of, mentioning the problem of distance between Vienna and Brussels, between civil society organizations that are represented in this room and the institutions. So in order to make an honest effort now, within the given time frame, to try to bridge that distance, I would like to invite, after you did, I would like already invite the audience here at that point to help us out and in trying to really reduce the distance and bring this discussion to a level where all of us can take something out of it. So please feel free to join me here on the podium. And but Judith, you wanted still to say something.
Yeah. thanks for the hint with the multi-annual framework that's being planned right now, and maybe I can come in with a practical example, because we as Arbeit Plus, we are involved in the European Social Fund in Austria, so we are part of a steering committee and are being asked to join the steering committee. We are involved in the discussions on a general basis, which is good, and which is also something that the European Commission is asking the member states to do, to involve NGOs, to involve civil society. But something we never succeeded, or something where we always failed, is asking for money for this kind of capacity building within the structural funds. And I think it would be a very good idea not only to have this rights and values fund, which sounds as a very good idea to me, but to also think about mainstreaming civil society capacity building into the structural funds, for example. Because if you mainstream it, like the topic of accessibility or the topic of gender mainstreaming, and put a focus on the contribution of civil society actors within the funds, because we are there, we are asked for expertise, we bring in this expertise, but we can also be coordinators for the scenes, we can be coordinators for the themes, and via the funds we could get money for capacity building of our own organizations. So I think this would be a very viable way. And we could, you know, go one step further when it comes to participation, because we are now sitting at the table, we are being invited, we are being heard. But I think it would be maybe interesting now, there's a new period coming, 2021 to 2027, to think about mainstreaming civil society organizations and their capacities and their funding within the structural funds.
Yes, my name is Frank Heuberger. I'm the representative of European Affairs from the BWE. This is a general network in Germany, the national network in Germany. And we just had a national hearing on this new program, Rights and Values, and to tell you the truth, altogether we were in a way quite disappointed. Disappointed even with the terminology, rights and values, especially the program Europe for Citizens. This is actually the core funding program for civil society. I would say since about 10 years we are asking to increase this budget a little bit. Not a single Europe is put more under the frame of rights and values, so it's pretty much the same. It's just now in this frame of rights and values, and not even a good answer could be given why it is in this frame. Just to see, it is said that there will be some synergies, some overlapping interest, it's more efficient and things like this, but it's really hard to find why it is this case. So there is no indicator that this really would help this Europe for Citizens program to be more effective or to develop more synergies. So on the very end, it sounds pretty good, but at least the Europe for Citizens program had some kind of a touch to it. Rights and values is so neutral. It doesn't indicate some kind of a normative approach. It's just so vague. So I really don't see an advantage to it. So I would really be happy if you could elaborate a little bit on it. And in terms of sitting at the table, I still do miss that, for example, to create the program, that the organized civil society is sitting on the table. It's very much the opposite. There's a brilliant American saying that goes, if you are not at the table, chances are you're on the menu. And it seems to me that we are still on the menu and not at the table.
Since you were addressed.
I don't want to be too... I want to answer you in a way so that everybody is benefiting, because these are quite technical issues. Huh? So the Future Rights and Values Fund will be a merge of two existing programs, which is the Europe for Citizens program and the Rights, Equality, Citizenship program. And this merge was decided because, first of all, we want to reduce the number of funding programs we have at European Union level. reasons of simplification, of ensuring more flexibility, etc. We also have we also want to merge these two programs, or have proposed to merge these two programs, because we, contrary to you, we think that there are synergies between the programs, between the Europe for Citizens that that supports financially civil society organizations, town twinning, but also remembrance work in Europe and the work on European identity and European history. So this is this one program, and on the other hand, the Rights, Equality, Citizenship program, where we work on fundamental rights, on democracy, also on citizenship, on equality. So we think that there are synergies to be generated here, and by putting, we hope and we think that by putting these two programs together, we can achieve synergies, we can achieve more with the funds we have at our disposal. Now, on the amounts, you're right. So when you look at what is now in Europe for Citizens and now in the Rights, Equality, Citizenship program in terms of amounts, and when you look at the proposals of the Commission, how much we want to put in the merged program in the future, it's true, it's more or less the same, so there won't be big increases. But to be honest, I think this is quite a good outcome. Or if we achieve to maintain this level of funding, it's quite a good outcome, because generally the MFF after 2020, there were very big cuts because of the departure of the UK. And in many other programs, in the very, very large majority of the other funding programs, there will be substantial cuts. So if we maintain the same level of funding, I think it will be an okay outcome. Of course, billions would be nicer, but okay.
Okay, I'm still not sure to which extent we meet the interest and the need of the audience, or whether we are really having here a discussion that is between, sorry to say the usual suspects, that's not the right expression, but an expert discussion. How many of you, please raise your hand, how many are actually familiar with, have been familiar with the Europe for Citizens program? Okay, that's quite a number. So I take that you're also interested in knowing where this is going, yes? Okay. Verena.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Verena Ringler. I will be on the panel tomorrow, but I'm an audience. I have an audience question today for you, Mrs. Bankier. You said we can only shoulder this in partnership with the member states, and we cannot do this alone. At the same time, we heard previously that the case of Austria, for instance, is an interesting one because Civicus downgraded this country's civic space to narrow. How can you make sure, when you work out the terms of reference of the Justice and Values program, and you do this together with member states, that you don't get the Trojan horse right into your package?
We didn't say it would be easy.
No, that's of course a very good question. I think so you want to know what we do now, not to have a Trojan horse, or in the future, or... I don't think we have a Trojan horse. I mean, the Commission is responsible, the European Commission, sorry for being expert again here, but the European Commission is responsible for executing the EU budget. And it's true that we have member states in our program committees who tell us here and there they want to fund this rather than this. But it's, to be honest, from a day-to-day experience, there's not a huge influence of member states on our programs and on the way we spend the money. And it's rather, I would say, a cooperation. I mean, what you are suggesting is that there are member states sitting there saying, I don't want organization X to be funded in country Y. Yeah? This is not happening. Because we have the programs. The programs are very explicit on the goals they should achieve. Democracy, fundamental rights, etc., non-discrimination. And on the basis of these programs, we draft our calls. And no, I mean, this is not happening really. Maybe one day it will happen, but this is not happening. It's rather, I mean, we have from time to time member states who come up with ideas, but again, they would need we are not in a situation really, very, very honestly and frankly, we are not in a situation where we have member states saying, I don't want to fund organization X in country Y, because there are two, I don't know what.
Yeah, it's very surprising to hear that, but I'm sure we will have more on these issues here. At the same time, the situation maybe will develop to one where maybe up until now the relationship between the EU and civil society has been about enriching system. You said helping us to keep the link with the citizens, promoting and defending EU values and so on. But it's again, coming back to Martin's point, calling the animal by its name, we have come into a context that might be very adversarial, where suddenly a new, whatever, alliance between the EU as the guardian of the treaties, or the EU Commission as the guardian of the treaties, will be in the decision to either form a new alliance with civil society across Europe or keep its loyalty with member state governments in order to save the ultimate values that are enshrined in our treaties.
I mean, yes, but I of course, I mean, the European Union is a creature of the member states, and we have, of course, to work with the member states. We cannot work against the member states, but there are certain fundamental values that we cherish, that we think are fundamental to the European Union, and I think we have done so far quite a good job in defending them, and we will continue to do so.
Okay. Well, there's not only the European Union. Well, I would be especially interested taking up one question from the first panel, where somebody said, I think it was Vera, there should be funding for coalition building. And now I know that only recently there has been a call of a coalition of foundations that, if I remember correctly, was exactly aiming at this coalition building at national level. And there's Gabi is here. I think they have already somehow participated in that call successfully. Is that a way out? I mean, excuse me if I address again you, would you recommend us to look for other means, and what is there as a common knowledge about the potential to tap into other resources beyond the Commission? Is that a street that we would have to go down and explore further? Maybe this is also an invitation to you and the audience.
I'm not familiar with this coalition. It's an Austrian coalition. It's a European. Okay, I can just tell you that we are funding European umbrella organizations, for example, and that's since many years. For example, European networks of civil society organizations active on against racism, or active on women's rights, or active on victims' rights, for example, children's rights. So there we fund these European networks, and I think this goes very much in the direction of coalition building, building bridges between the member states and between the NGO communities in the member states, and forming a kind of European civil society.
I mean, again, taking up a little bit what I took from the first panel, if there is, let's say, if we agree, we civil society platforms across countries agree that there is a need to build together a new narrative for why it is important to have a healthy civil society, why it is important also to defend European values and so on. Are there means to support these activities in the future by the Commission?
Yes, I'm pretty sure there are, and there will be. And I mean, we would need to have the future programs on the table and decided to be able to answer this question with certainty. But I guess this is I mean, not only guess, I think this is something that is very much in the interest of the EU, to have, again, a vibrant and active and alive civil society that also works together. Yeah.
Thank you. I really don't want to make your life, Mr. Bunker, even more complicated, but I couldn't refrain. I don't want to go into the numbers. However, just one small number I must mention here. We all very much like the Europe for Citizens program. It's a very useful program. However, for example, in the civil society action strand, the success rate is 7%. So the overdraft is so huge. I'm all for competition. I think it's very important to have a competitive element in funding, but it's more like lottery than competition. So 7% is it's quite a low success rate compared to the obvious need that is out there. However, I think the numbers is not everything. And here I just like to refer to your question, actually, whether Civitatis is a model that could be applied elsewhere, or other funding could be used for building stronger civil societies in Europe. Of course, the Commission is not the only thing. However, what we have to see here is that Civitatis was put together by 15 European foundations. Currently, the money they dispose of is 2 million euros, as compared to what the Commission disposes of. So the magnitudes are different. But anyway, regardless of how big the funding, I think the devil is also in the details. I very much understand and agree why there should be a European dimension in the funding that the Commission provides. But what we also see is that building democracy and strengthening European values happens on the ground, in the field, in the countries. And those organizations working on a local level could be strong allies for the Commission, for the treaty, for the European values. So I think the accessibility is also a very strong issue here. And there has been a number of organizations, including mine, that were advocating for the Rights and Values program. But besides the budget allocation, we also said that it's very important how this money is distributed. And we strongly propose that there should be mechanisms, processes that can help the access of smaller NGOs, such as more flexible administrative requirements, the inclusion of re-grantors as intermediaries, and very often actually the EA Norway grant mechanism or model has been quoted as a best practice, which has a separate priority on civil societies and uses local independent intermediaries to distribute the funding so that it would reach to the smallest organizations. And this model has already proven its worth in 15 countries. And I think that's one of the directions maybe that the European or Commission funding could further develop in the future once, of course, the numbers of the new MFF are there.
Do you think that's a useful proposition?
I agree with most of what you have said. There's no question. It's very important not only how much money there is, but also how you can access the money, especially for small organizations that don't have the administrative capacity for our, sometimes very complicated rules. Yes, so I agree with most of what you have said. You mentioned the Norway fund. That's of course a great instrument, I think, but we are not Norway. And I also have to here, somehow nuance a bit and add a bit of caution. I mean, don't expect us to become the Norway grant. We don't have the means. I think they do great work, and we admire them, and we look at how they work when we design now the future instruments. But I don't think we'll ever be like them for a question of resources.
Okay. Are there more contributions from the audience? And in the meantime, Jean-Marc, did you want to add something to the discussion on the, again,
perhaps I
approach you as a rapporteur.
I would say that I totally agree with Vera said, and we insist in the report of the Economic and Social Committee about the access for the small organization to the fund, because it's always the big network who have means to prepare, to build this project that have more possibilities. But mind, there is a danger to oppose the big network and the small organization, because we are in this meeting room responsible of network who have inside member who are small organizations. As the case of my organization, we have 30,000 associations in all France, and there is a big network that the Ligue de l'Enseignement, but we have money that we can put in the network. We have the possibility now, and I would like Madame Blanquier says more about this, the possibility of cascading grants. It's important for our network to know this. And I would like to help the Commission, because Madame Blanquier is sufficiently strong to defend, but we have noticed some progress. For example, the co-funding. You know that we have the possibility now to valorize the work of volunteer. It was not the case since, and you know that when you build some European project, the most difficult is to find the co-funding. We have some possibility, and also progress in this. For my part, I say I know that money, the quality of the use is more important than perhaps the mountain, but the many organizations needs money, and we are afraid don't find at the end the totality of the money we had for example, the program L'Europe pour les citoyens, with a program was very, very important, and we are afraid when it's mutualized that at the end there is less money in this program. For the moment, it's all.
Okay, more comments? Julie?
Yes, I of course totally agree with the colleagues who have been on stage already now on that it's too bad that it's such a little amount of organization who will get support from Europe for Citizen program or other program. But that being said, what can we as also national NGOs, organizations do to push our national governments, so it's not only relied on the European Commission? What do you expect from us to push our national governments to put into this debates about funding for civil society in Europe and also cross-country civil society cooperation from a national perspective? That's a question for you. And then for civil society organizations who are being challenged, as we see in Austria at the moment, what can you then expect from us for a national government also to push other European national governments, so it's not only relied on the European Commission, also especially on funding?
Maybe I start, because thank you for bringing in the national perspective again, because I think it's equally important. And if we don't succeed in building coalitions on a national level and of surviving on a national level, we won't build European alliances and European coalitions. And I think to answer your question, or try to answer it, is to strengthen our networks, like strengthen our alliances, strengthen our pacts we already have, and ask for more, because our agenda, like in the last 2 years within the alliance, for example, was quite friendly, I would say. So we asked for more participation, we asked for sitting at the table, we asked for an overall strategy. We never asked for a national fund, for example, for grants for NGOs, and I think it's about time to ask for one. So maybe we should definitely ask for a national future fund for civil society and put more pressure on politicians. I mean, they are not here today, they are here tomorrow, but I think this will be our task as well. And the other thing is, as I said before, the structural funds challenge also the funds, or challenge the funds. I mean, the structural funds are being co-financed 50% by the local authorities, so we should challenge the funds where we have access to, in order to get money out of the funds for our capacities, because if we don't have capacities we cannot get involved. And so we should definitely put more emphasis and put more pressure on this agenda as NGOs, and as small NGOs especially.
So your question, what can you do vis-à-vis your government so that there is enough and good funding for NGOs at European level? One important thing you can do is to convince the government and push the government to support programs, future programs like rights and values, so that because they then come to Brussels and negotiate this. And in the Council of Ministers, unlike in the Parliament, we very often have the situation that the member states' representatives, the ministers from national governments, they tend to want to reduce, of course, the EU budget because they have to pay for it. So I think it would be good to have more governments in the Council who say it's important to have funds like rights and values. It's important to fund civil society. And we are willing to pay our part because we think it's important. So to make your government like an ambassador for civil society funding and support.
Okay. I have a question, because you said there's no way around competition. How comfortable are you with your criteria and your processes in making sure that those receive the funds that really should get it?
Well, of course I'm not very happy, and we are not very happy at the European Commission that we don't have enough money to fund everybody. It's true, as was just said, the rates, the success rates when applying for funding are quite low, in the sense that there are much more organizations interested in getting funding than funds we can disperse. This varies according to subject areas, but in the, for example, on fundamental rights projects or equality projects, there's always more need, then the demand is much higher than what we can offer. So with that, I'm not very happy. Otherwise, I mean, we try to formulate the calls. So we try to design the calls for proposals in a way that the funding that we disperse supports our policy goals. And we think we reach the right organizations, but of course we can always do better, and we have to learn to even become better and really fund the organizations that deserve the funding most. Of course, it's a tough process. We have sometimes the impression that we easily reach certain large organizations. I mean, for us it's easier to reach the larger organizations that are organized at European level, that have already established partnerships across member states, than the smaller organizations that have maybe the more interesting projects, but they don't have the capacity and the knowledge and the know-how on how to apply for EU funds.
So once you're aware of that deficiency, is there something you can do?
We are doing all the time. We are learning all the time and improving, trying to improve all the time. Yeah.
Je suis, si vous me le permettez, je suis obligé de demander l'aide d'Alexandrina, parce que je suis d'une génération où on n'apprenait pas l'anglais, donc je ne suis pas capable de le faire. Bon, je comprends très bien qu'on veuille nous aider à bien définir nos objectifs, notre façon d'agir. Enfin, ça fait quand même 25...
Just a moment. So, I understand that we need some help, and you are ready to offer help to better formulate our objectives and strategies.
Enfin, pour beaucoup d'entre nous, ça fait 25 ou 30 ans qu'on fait ça.
For a lot of us, it's been 30 years that we are doing this.
Bon, je m'appelle Dominique Guibert, je suis le président de l'Association européenne pour la défense des droits de l'homme.
Dominique Guibert is president of the European Association for the Defense of Human Rights.
Mais je suis un président déchu.
But I am help me out, a fallen president.
Parce que mon association n'a pas eu la subvention sur le programme Europe pour les citoyens.
Because my organization did not receive the grant for the Europe for Citizens program, operating grant.
Le personnel est licencié, le bureau est annulé, nous avons rompu les contrats et nous essayons de nous maintenir nominalement.
So we were forced to break employment contracts, to give up office renting, and now we are struggling to survive informally as an organization.
Puisque les subventions sont de l'argent public, je comprends très bien qu'on soit évalué.
I understand very well that we undergo evaluation, given that European money is public money.
Mais j'aurais aimé que les critères d'évaluation soient un petit peu plus sensibles au milieu des associations que ce qui est en général utilisé.
But I would have preferred that criteria for evaluations take a little bit more into account the specificity of the NGO sector.
Alors je dois vous avouer que quand j'ai appris quelle est l'entreprise qui évaluait les associations sur le programme Europe sur le citoyen et peut-être les autres,
I must confess that when I learned out who was the enterprise, the company that was doing the evaluations for the Europe for Citizens program and probably for a lot of others,
donc la Commission a choisi l'entreprise Deloitte pour évaluer ces programmes.
That the Commission has chosen Deloitte to evaluate these programs.
Je prétends que cette entreprise ne connaît rien au milieu des associations.
I claim that this company does not know anything about the way NGOs function.
Je regrette donc cette décision.
Therefore, I regret this decision.
Et je me pose la question de savoir de combien a été le contrat signé avec Deloitte pour faire ces évaluations.
And I asked myself the question, how much money was involved in the contract with Deloitte to do these evaluations?
So, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, so it's not Deloitte who's evaluating the proposals submitted in a call for proposals. It's an executive agency, an executive EU agency that evaluates the proposals and helps coming to a decision together with the Commission. It might be that Deloitte did some ex post audits, that's possible, but they're certainly not taking the decision of which organizations are funded and which are not funded. I take note of the criticisms. Of course, I mean, no system is perfect. We can always learn, we can always improve. I think our system is pretty good, but again, everything is improvable. And I'll take note and we'll bring these comments also home.
But still, I think I assume that when you formulate policies and calls, that you reach out to civil society experts. I mean, those that do not depend on the funding themselves. But is that true?
Of course, it's true. Our process is an independent evaluation process with a lot of safeguards in it. I mean, I don't want to bore you at this time of the day. I could spell out the whole process. It's quite a long and a cumbersome process, but it has all the guarantees we can provide for independence and for knowledge also of civil society. Voilà.
But is there any recommendation that you could make to us in order to, since we have taken our time to be here and discuss, giving us some kind of advantage to be more competitive in the future with the future program?
Yes, you have to. My most important advice and tip would be that you have to try to fall into the call for proposals. The call is very, very important. It defines what objectives we want to reach with our funding, and you have to formulate proposals and set up projects that meet the objectives of the call. That's the most important thing. If you want, I mean, there are some organizations, again, that are very, very skilled and very good at doing this. I admit that experience plays a very important part in it. Also capacity to apply to EU funding, administrative capacity to do so. But it's really, we want to get good projects, and good projects for us are projects that have an impact on the ground and that support the policy goals we formulate.
My name is Stanka Parac. I come from the local democracy agency in Serbia, so I'm a bit odd man out here. But we are the member of the European Network for Local Democracy, ALDA, also very active in the Balkans, creating also our own Balkan network for local democracy. Our experience considering different programs are also related with Europe for Citizens and IPA funding opportunities, for which normally the Europe for Citizens is a kind of a learning laboratory for IPA funding programs, because they are much easier for implementation and also gets us better prepared for managing IPA funds. But this is not the question I wanted to raise this time, or how to say, the experience, to share the basic experience related with the CSO coalition building all the time at the regional, national level, which is our mission, but also working with local governments. And I think this is a kind of a natural partnership in which, or through which, I'm pretty sure we could get a better access to EU funding opportunities. For me, here, the main question is to what extent is the potential enlargement strategy incorporated in the budget you are mentioning, considering also the fact that the experience also with sector budgeting for the countries which are exceeding or in, let's say, negotiation process, somehow is neglecting the local tier of government. So the local governments are not really in the position to, working also together with the civil society, to apply more successfully to EU funds. So just to sum up, the enlargement strategy, considering the Brexit, considering the 2025 as the year, which could be very important. So to what extent actually this new budget includes this potentially, I guess, a larger number of EU member states, and not less number, I hope so.
So there are special funds for enlargement, there are special funds for countries outside of the European Union, also on democracy, human rights, etc. Sometimes these funds are even easier to handle for civil society organizations than the funds we have for the member states, interestingly. But okay, there are special financial instruments to fund candidate countries and countries outside. There's also the possibility for candidate countries to access the current programs. Serbia, for example, just became a member of the right, or just acceded this rights, equality, citizenship program. So there are possibilities there as well. Yes, and of course we, I don't know exactly how it was done technically to integrate possible new members in the future financial framework, but this is done we've always done this in the history of the EU, and there have certainly been mechanisms built in the proposals to cater for possibly new member states during the next 7-year period.
Okay, at this point in time, I think we should try to wrap up. Judith, can I start with you? I must admit that I have a hard time in wrapping up and trying to summarize the discussion because this is even more, it sounds to me even more complex than the political discussion. But Judith, what is your outlook on the next 7 years frame, knowing what you know now about what we can expect from the Commission?
I'm still thinking about what you just said, what we all need in order to be able to apply for the fund. And you were talking about capacity, about skills, about experience, about everything in order to be able to apply. And that's quite a hard lesson when you are a small local NGO and when you are facing a lot of pressure. As many of the small companies I work with, the small organizations I work with, are facing at the moment. So of course I understand that you want good projects, that you want experienced NGOs, but from my experience, NGOs are best when being local, when working on the ground, and they should have all the support to be able to survive, to be able to collaborate, to be able to do the work they can do best and be supported in every possible way from the national governments and from the European Union. And then it would be nice to have some extra money on really elaborated projects. So this is a wish I really have. And this is something I think NGOs will need more and more, to have like basic financing in order to stay small and local, because this is where they function best. This is where they have their powers. And yeah, the national governments are being, we have to put them under more pressure. So this is something we as national alliances have to put on our agenda. And I think the European Union should support NGOs, not only with projects. So that's my big wish for the future and for the next 7 years, not only with projects, but with basic funding. And I think we could use the funds that are already being put in place in order to finance capacity building. So that's one of the big wishes. And if you ask me what's my future, again, wish, or what's my vision, and maybe I come back to the first panel, because there was a lot of talk about utopia, or how we can, find a new vision, new utopia. And sometimes I have this feeling that NGOs, and at least the NGOs I work with, are so full of utopia every day. And sometimes I have the feeling, if we speak about utopia and we have to find utopia, and if we have to find a vision, then you can get quite frustrated, because that's what we do. We find workable utopias every day, and we work them every day. And so I think we should, in order to be resilient also and to stay healthy, and somebody said this before, and I really like that you said it, and that we also have to think about how we stay, how do we face like our psychohygienic conditions? How do we stay resilient? How do we stay healthy? And I think it's maybe the most important question. And if we have to struggle for everyday survival because of the basic money is not being there, then we will face trouble in this special area. So yes. So that's my big wish, that we look at this, that we support NGOs in what they do best, and that we have this also optimistic view on politics, stay resilient, and make sure that we trust in the utopias we are already working at and working on.
Thank you. Jean-Marc, your conclusion?
An information and an anecdote. Information, we have the possibility always to have operating grant, because at the moment there is we are a bit anxious, but it's a good news. The anecdote is to go to the same way that my colleague of Association Européenne des Droits de l'Homme. There is a cabinet, I don't give the name, who evaluate the project of our friends of Solidar. And this is a project, the member of this officine said there is a problem here because we are not put in competition this organization. And my colleague said, but it's impossible because it's a confederation of trade unions. And the European Confederation of Trade Unions, has a monopoly because they are only the unique organization about trade unions. And there are problems, and we go to the ombudsman because the result was they are not putting in competition on this project. It's to go to the same way because this organization don't know where you are, how you work. So it's a difficulty with the evaluation. I finish.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bankier, what do you take with you back to Brussels from here?
Well, again, for me it's really interesting to hear you and to hear what you think is important. And but what I hear also is, and this is really the key difficulty for the European Union, is how the European, the national, and the local levels play together. And this is we have this problem for NGOs, who plays which role? I mean, is it really for the European Union to fund the local Austrian, maybe regional NGO. I'm not so sure, yeah? But I understand also your point in saying regional and local is what NGOs are best at, and we should support that, and we should give them the possibility that they can work creatively, dynamically on the ground and not, you know, bury them in administrative, I don't know what, yeah? So I think this is a very fundamental question about the European Union. We see it here when we discuss NGO funding. We see it in many other, you know, in many other discussions around the European Union. We want, in any way, we want to get this right. I think this is crucial that we get this balance between national, European, local rights, also in the next multi-annual financial framework and with regard to NGO funding. And I mean, I would be very, very interested to know how you think that the EU could deliver, yeah, on funding spontaneously these dynamic local NGOs without running the danger of, you know, giving away money maybe to organizations that don't deserve it. So it's really I think we have to discuss, we have to exchange and get this right. Yeah.
Okay, if you allow me just a small attempt of a conclusion from my side. Not on programs, not on calls and competition. What I realized very strongly today is that one doesn't usually discuss, well, there's even a discussion on the funding of social services and the programs you are doing on the labor market. And I mean, social service provision usually is not so disputed in the public. And I recall, despite some warnings, I've looked into some of the forums over the last few days when the Civicus message was delivered to the Austrian public. And now you have everywhere online, you have these forums where people spill their guts about NGOs who are just working for their own profit and taking advantage of ordinary citizens, and really disgusting things that come up. And that really, with what I've heard today, makes me think that we really need to be strong and make bold demands to whomever that there is funding for organizations who effectively defend the need of civil society to make people understand how important it is that civil rights and civic space is respected. I mean, this is not, I mean, these people that, as I say, spill their guts in the forums, sometimes they say, yes, of course, the Red Cross, yeah, I understand, and also the whatever people saving mountaineers, climbers in the mountains, yes, of course, they are fine, they are good people. But all the other NGOs, and NGO has become really bad-mouthing these days. I don't know in other countries, but in Austria that's definitely the case. Environmental organizations have already decided in Austria not to use the term NGO anymore, because this has become a synonym in certain media already for some people, really to a reason to be attacked and trigger all kind of hate speech nowadays. So this is really where we again, and that, as you said, yeah, we are trying to develop utopias every day. We have another big responsibility again, and a big task in claiming, yeah, the need that for these tasks also to be funded in the future, if we want to save this common project. Yeah, that much from my side. I would like now to close for today. I would like to invite Juliana Rada from Romania Civil Society Development Foundation, in order to respect the tradition, to hand over this in a month from now. Austrian presidency will be over, Romania will take over. Congratulations. So, after what you have heard today, and please tell us a little bit from a civil society point of view, what do you expect from the Romanian EU presidency?
Yeah, thank you, Franz. Well, it's been a long day, but pretty fruitful, and I think I had comments on everything you were saying, but I just kept them to be very brief now. What to tell you? We face very difficult times in Romania in terms of civil society right now. Maybe you are aware of them, of the threats and all the smears that we have on social media and also on the TV. And as you said earlier, once they hear it's an NGO, then hate speech and other kinds of comments appear. So, and it's also a matter of the operation environment that we have. We've had some laws trying to narrow down our operation. Maybe you've heard about the anti-money laundering law that is trying to restrict NGOs more and more, and then we have 3 or 4 laws that are being discussed on NGOs. I can share with you more tomorrow, maybe during the breaks. And then on the other hand, we have the Council presidency coming in January, and lots of discussion about the multi-annual financial framework that we will, of course, have to facilitate. And there's the Brexit as well, and then the European Parliament elections. So we don't know whether we are ready. That's from the civil society perspective. Officially, we are ready to take the presidency. We just had our minister in charge with the preparations changed last week. We have a new minister dealing with it now, but we are ready. I can tell you that from the... Sorry? Well, I will not... Yeah, well, from the civil society perspective, we are not that ready to take over the presidency. We have hardly been invited to contribute to the preparations. We have a platform of NGOs that are willing to contribute and bring their expertise and perspective into discussion. It was founded by us 3 years ago, and we have around 40 federations joining the platform in various domains. And as you all know, I guess, sometimes CSOs are more expertise than others to contribute to EU affairs and to bring more into that. Yeah, so we haven't been involved that much. However, we are willing to be, and we are very optimistic related to our discussions today that maybe somehow things will sort out. In terms of funding, since we've been talking about funding in this past panel, there is no public funding for the presidency, for the civil society in Romania. We can only use the logo if we register our events for the presidency. So this is the support our government, either at central, local level, gives us. But we have some plans that I would like to share, and then I will just stop just to be very, very brief. We will have a civil society summit in Romania, hopefully in Sibiu, in April next year. It's before the high-level EU leaders summit talking about the future of Europe. And we plan to have it pan-European. That is, to have all European networks joining in. Of course, the European Civic Forum is going to be there with us, and we will be together. And then we will have representatives from each EU member state coming. This forum is going to have a civil society manifesto about the future of Europe. And we really want to bring European values and the topic of a shrinking space for civil society into the manifesto to make it more aware, to make, well, the European citizens and also the NGOs more aware of what's happening. And talking about coalitions, just to build on what you have been talking before, it is really important to have coalitions, both at local level but also the European level. And nothing is going to happen if we don't work together. I think it's really difficult times that we are facing. I think it's going to be even more difficult in the coming future. And if we are not all together in this, it's not gonna work. And our utopia for a better Europe, for a better life, and for Europe great for all, it's only going to be an utopia that will never come into reality. I think this is everything from... I'm very optimistic, but I'm trying to be realistic as well, as you can see.
Good luck. Okay, I think that's, we'll call it a day for today. There's one more thing. We have had little time to inform you about this mega campaign. You see the roll-up here. There is, the European Civic Forum is doing the first time, and Jean-Marc said it already, a pan-European campaign called Mega Campaign. And in the frame of this campaign, there are quite serious and outreaching activities preparing for the 10th of December under the logo, under the slogan "No Day Without Us." And there is a website that you can consult, and you will find all the information there. What I would like to ask you, please, if you just join us here quickly for a picture together with the poster, yeah, calling to join for the 10th of December, No Day Without Us. Interestingly, I was mentioning the forums that I was recommended not to consult. Actually, yeah, it makes you sick if you do that too much. But interestingly, I found some proposals from citizens anonymously calling for exactly for such a day, making people really understand what would happen if there was a day without us. So maybe that could be really something to follow up in the future more than we've been doing in the past. Please, Vladimir, and please just quickly step up. And then those that have registered for the dinner at Habibi and Havara, please move over quickly afterwards. Dinner will start at 7. Thank you.